It's a common human experience to walk into a room, open a cupboard, and momentarily lose track of why you're there. Or to encounter a neighbor you've known for years in the building's entryway and suddenly struggle to recall their name. You might offer a smile to mask your confusion, joking about getting older, but internally a chill creeps in. What if this is the beginning of dementia? After the age of 60, this fear becomes a quiet, persistent companion. A slight increase in forgetfulness, and deep down, the thought emerges: will I become someone who doesn't recognize their children, forgets their own address, someone living as if in a fog? And the most disheartening part is that many are convinced that if dementia sets in, it's an inevitable fate, a matter of genetics or a sealed sentence. But this is not the case. I state this calmly and with conviction, drawing not on theories but on decades of practical experience, on the faces of patients and their families. Behind every diagnosis of dementia lies a story, a life story where, brick by brick, over years, the very ground was laid for this illness to easily take root. And here's the crucial, unpleasant but honest point. Most often, it's not due to a single dire gene, a single unbearable stress, or one forgotten stroke. The real cause, which many underestimate, lies in how we have treated our brains for decades. We meticulously care for our hearts, monitoring blood pressure, undergoing electrocardiograms. We safeguard our joints, choosing softer chairs and more comfortable shoes. But the brain, for most people, the brain operates on the principle if it doesn't hurt, it must be fine. It's overloaded for years, deprived of oxygen and sleep, poisoned by sugar, nicotine, alcohol, loneliness, and a barrage of trivial distractions. And then, at 65, everyone is astonished. Where did these memory problems come from? I'm just getting old. If you've listened this far, I have a small request for you as a mature, discerning individual. If the topic of dementia is important to you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. For you, it's a second. For me, it's an opportunity to convey calm, honest, medical knowledge to people who genuinely want to maintain their mental clarity for as long as possible. Why do I say that the true cause of dementia is hidden from most? Because society is accustomed to seeing only the tip of the iceberg, the diagnosis, the medication, someone's difficult journey. What happened 10, 20, 30 years prior is often dismissed as minor. Oh, blood pressure fluctuates. Oh, sugar is a little high. Oh, I only get 4 hours of sleep, but I get everything done. Oh, I haven't been able to focus on a book for years. I just watch short videos all the time. At least it's a distraction. Each such trifle is like a small blow to the brain. It can withstand 1, even 10. But thousands of these blows over decades lead to memory issues after 60, not merely due to age. Consider a straightforward example. A 62-year-old man comes in forgetting where he put his money, asking the same question twice, getting dates confused. We begin to examine his life. It turns out that since he was 40, he's had persistently high blood pressure. He takes medication only when he remembers. He's overweight. His sugar levels are at the upper limit of normal. He sleeps 5 hours because of work and watches television until late. Minimal physical activity, maximum stress. And all of this, honestly, do you need to be a prophet to guess how this will affect the brain? But most people associate dementia solely with frightening terms: Alzheimer's, stroke, cerebral vascular issues. Yet the true root is often the same. We allow our brains to function for too long, under conditions of chronic deprivation and chronic strain. Deprivation isn't just about food, it's about oxygen, quality sleep, purpose, and genuine human connection. Strain isn't merely workplace stress, it's the constant influx of information, alarming news, the absence of true rest, where the brain truly switches off, rather than just flipping from one feed to another. Why do I emphasize this so calmly yet persistently, particularly for individuals over 50? Because at this age, much can still be changed. A person at 55 or 60 is not a predetermined diagnosis. The brain retains plasticity. It can, to some extent, reverse the consequences of years of neglect if provided with the right conditions. But to achieve this, it's crucial to stop viewing dementia as fate and start recognizing its actual origins. Ask yourself one simple question. If my brain is the most valuable organ I possess, am I truly treating it accordingly? Am I monitoring my blood pressure to ensure it's stable? Am I prioritizing normal sleep rather than boasting about managing on just 4 hours? Am I engaging in physical activity daily to ensure blood reaches my head, not just my television? Am I conversing with real people, not just screens? Or have I grown accustomed to considering these mere preferences, only to later fear the word dementia? In this video, I will intentionally refrain from frightening you with diagnoses and grim narratives. Fear is a poor motivator. It is far more important to calmly, step by step, examine the actual mechanisms that cause some individuals to maintain a clear mind after 60, while others experience a gradual decline. And the most intriguing, significant, and unexpected aspect, rarely discussed even by physicians, we will reserve for last. It doesn't involve pills, genetics, or superfoods for memory, yet without it, all other advice functions only by half. If you wish to live to 70, 80, or 90 with a clear gaze, recognizing your loved ones, remembering your grandchildren's names, and managing your affairs without getting lost in your own home, simply listen to this conversation to its conclusion. And while you're at it, if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. This way, you won't miss crucial topics about the health of your head, heart, and entire body, which empower an adult to remain the master of their life rather than a prisoner of a diagnosis. And now, to move beyond generalities and delve into specifics, we will begin with the very first element that initiates the path towards either a clear, vibrant brain or a sluggish, fading memory. This is a step that can be taken as early as tomorrow morning without expensive tests or complex regimens. Yet, it is precisely this step that begins to alter the fate of the brain after 60. It sometimes seems as though memory deteriorates simply due to age. What can you expect at 60 or 70? It's normal to forget names, dates, appointments, little everyday details. But upon closer inspection, it becomes clear age is far from always the primary culprit. Almost invariably, something much more concrete, insidious, and stubborn lies behind it, something that erodes the brain's blood vessels for years without causing pain or obvious symptoms, and this factor is so commonplace that most people cease to notice it altogether. We are talking about unstable blood pressure, those very fluctuations we attribute to the weather, fatigue, nerves, poor sleep, or simply random chance. Meanwhile, it is precisely these variations that over decades create the conditions under which the brain gradually loses its ability to concentrate, to remember, and to maintain clarity. Why is this so critical after the age of 60? Because with age, blood vessels lose their former flexibility, becoming coarser, less elastic. And while a 30-year-old might experience a sharp rise in blood pressure with almost no consequences, after 60, a similar surge becomes a blow to the brain. It all happens very quietly. Microscopic vessels thinner than a human hair experience strain, their walls become damaged, and blood flow to the brain slightly diminishes. Not enough to cause a stroke, but enough that each such micro tear makes memory incrementally weaker. A person doesn't even notice the emergence of the characteristic, "Wait, did you just ask something?" or the new habit of searching for keys in places they never used to leave them. This isn't absent-mindedness, not old age, and not poor sleep. It's a lack of nourishment for the brain caused by blood pressure behaving unpredictably. Over these years, I've observed countless individuals presenting with complaints of forgetfulness, inattentiveness, and a sense of internal fog. And in 9 out of 10, the pattern was almost identical. Blood pressure higher than normal in the morning, dropping slightly during the day, and spiking again in the evening. The person feels fine, perhaps a slight headache or fatigue, but no one connects these sensations to brain function. Yet it is these daily swings that lay the groundwork for future memory problems, unnoticeably but very consistently. I recall a 65-year-old history teacher, an intelligent, thoughtful, and refined individual. His daughter brought him in explaining that her father was becoming confused about dates, repeating questions, and sometimes losing the thread of conversations. No pathology was found during the examination. Test results were good, hormones normal, but his blood pressure log immediately explained everything. A high morning surge, a drop by lunchtime, another spike in the evening. For someone without knowledge of physiology, this seems trivial. So what? Blood pressure fluctuates. But for the brain, it represents a prolonged siege that, year after year, depletes the neuron's ability to function properly. We stabilized his blood pressure, eliminating the fluctuations. Within just a couple of months, he became noticeably more alert. This isn't magic, it's simply proper nourishment for the brain, which finally began to arrive uniformly. This is precisely why I persistently advise. Check your blood pressure not when your head hurts, but when everything seems fine. Blood pressure is like an old barometer. It signals the condition of your blood vessels, but it does so very quietly. And if a person doesn't measure it for years, they may not even suspect that their brain has been operating under chronic stress for a long time. The most crucial factor isn't isolated high readings, but instability. The brain can endure much, but it cannot tolerate roller coasters. It requires smoothness, uniformity, and a calm blood flow. Only then can memory function like a well-oiled machine, not a tired lamp that flickers on and off. This is why it's so important to measure your blood pressure both in the morning and evening for at least a few consecutive days, simply to see the real picture. Many notice for the first time that the difference between their morning and evening readings is 20, 30, sometimes even 40 points. And then they begin to understand that forgetfulness is not random, not age, but a predictable consequence of living with these fluctuations. And the best part is that this situation can be remedied. Blood pressure is one of those factors that a person can genuinely influence at any age. When blood pressure becomes stable, the brain receives steady, calm support. Tiny micro-injuries to the vessels disappear, blood supply improves, sleep quality is restored, and anxious absent-mindedness subsides. A person literally begins to feel more composed. And it is on this stable foundation that the next step becomes possible, the one rarely discussed, yet which plays an almost decisive role in the brain's ability to recover at night. And we will discuss this next because it harbors another silent memory destroyer that many attribute to age, though it has absolutely no connection to it. When a person's blood pressure stabilizes, the brain seems to take its first deep breath. But for it to truly recover, it also needs nighttime order. That state where the brain clears itself of the day's debris, resets connections, tidies thoughts, and makes memory resilient. This is an astonishing process that most people don't even consider. We're accustomed to viewing sleep as something ordinary, everyday, almost mundane. You lie down in bed, you fall asleep. What's the difference? But the difference is enormous, especially after 60. You see, what happens at night? While a person sleeps, the brain, in a sense, opens its doors for internal cleaning. Spaces between cells expand, through which a special fluid flows, washing away metabolic waste products. These are the very products that accumulate throughout the day and are one of the causes of memory decline. This cleaning doesn't occur during the day. The brain is too busy. But at night, yes, but only under one condition: that sleep is deep, calm, and involves proper immersion into sleep phases. And this is where the main problem of mature age begins. A person often thinks, I sleep for 7 hours, so everything is fine. But those 7 hours can be deceptive, because if sleep is superficial, fragmented, if a person wakes up several times, tosses and turns, goes to bed too late, or with a phone, then brain restoration simply doesn't commence. It's as if they are lying in bed but remain active. And the most intriguing part is that in the morning, a person might not even feel overtly tired. They've grown accustomed to this state, considering it normal, but in reality, the brain isn't resting at night, and memory weakens not from age, but from the lack of nighttime repair. This often manifests subtly. A person says, I sleep normally, but I wake up with a heavy head, need coffee to pull myself together, take a long time to get going, or conversely, have trouble falling asleep, toss and turn for a long time, feel thoughts spinning in my head as if the engine won't turn off. I seem to sleep at night but wake up in the morning as if after hard labor. This is a sign that the brain hasn't achieved deep sleep, and it is in this phase that memory is formed. It's where the brain sorts information. It's where it rids itself of toxic proteins that, in the long run, become a precursor to dementia. I recall a 72-year-old woman, active, energetic. She worked as an accountant her entire life. Few complaints, she forgets individual words. Sometimes she can't remember where she put her phone. Reading has become slightly more difficult. At first glance, these seem like ordinary age-related changes, but when we began to examine her sleep, everything became clear. It took an hour to an hour and a half to fall asleep, 2 to 3 awakenings during the night, sometimes an early morning awakening with a feeling of anxiety. Externally, no one noticed this. She smiled, socialized, cooked, led a normal life. But her brain wasn't resting at night. The deep sleep phase was short and disrupted. We adjusted her routine. An earlier bedtime, limited bright light, evening relaxation instead of information overload, a short walk in the evening. After 3 weeks, she herself said, I'm remembering better now, my head feels clearer. And this is not a coincidence. When the brain rests at night, memory begins to revive. Here it's important to understand one thing. Without normal sleep, the brain cannot recover in any way. It's about the fact that in mature age, it becomes more difficult for the brain to transition from wakefulness to sleep if it has been overloaded with stimuli all evening, television, news, messages, videos. All of this creates background arousal that persists even after a person turns off the light. The brain doesn't have time to reach a state of quiet, and sleep becomes superficial. And superficial sleep is sleep without restoration. The problem is that people rarely connect their daytime state to how they slept at night. They think they're just tired, it's just their age, just a tough day, but the brain can't hide the truth. If it hasn't rested, memory becomes fragile. If it hasn't been cleansed overnight, thoughts become viscous. If deep sleep is reduced, neural connections begin to disintegrate faster. And here lies a simple but very important realization. Normal sleep is not a luxury, a pleasant bonus, or something that happens if possible. It is a direct prerequisite for brain health. An aging person might underestimate its importance for decades, unaware that night after night they are leaving their most vital organ uncleaned, But when a person begins to improve their sleep, even in small steps, the brain almost always responds. I've seen this hundreds of times. Clarity returns, irritability subsides, memory becomes more reliable, even mood stabilizes. And most interestingly, when a person establishes proper nighttime rest, many other bodily functions begin to improve on their own. Blood pressure becomes more even, sugar levels fluctuate less, appetite is easier to control, cravings for sweets decrease. The body begins to function as a single unit because nighttime sleep is the primary restoration system, and if it's disrupted, everything else works only by half. But there's another element closely linked to how the brain experiences the night. It seems external, mundane, unimportant, yet it actually affects memory no less than sleep and blood pressure, and many adults underestimate it just as severely. It's precisely because of this that a person wakes up without feeling refreshed in the morning. And during the day, they experience absent-mindedness even if they slept for 8 hours. There's a silent factor that gradually, almost imperceptibly, diminishes clarity in adults. It doesn't cause pain, doesn't scream with symptoms, doesn't make you clutch your head. On the contrary, a person is confident that everything is fine. They are breathing, they are alive, they are walking, so they have enough oxygen. But it is precisely because of this illusion that hundreds of thousands of people over 50 live for years with a mild but constant oxygen deficiency, so small that the body compensates for it, but so persistent that memory begins to fail. The brain is the most demanding organ. Imagine an engine that runs non-stop. Even when you sleep, it doesn't rest, it doesn't turn off for a second, and it consumes a quarter of all the oxygen entering the body. Any reduction in intake, however small, immediately impacts its function. But the impact is gentle, gradual, so people don't notice. They simply start to feel more tired, absent-minded, heavy-headed, with reduced motivation. And most interestingly, many attribute this to age, and when in reality, the brain is operating in economy mode. Why does this happen? Because with age, breathing becomes less deep, the chest cavity becomes less flexible, the muscles involved in breathing work less effectively, and a person takes fewer full breaths. Add to this the habit of spending a lot of time sitting, and your breathing becomes shallow and superficial. In youth, the body easily compensates, but after 60, this compensation weakens increasingly, and then the brain simply doesn't receive the amount of oxygen that used to come automatically. I often observe the same pattern. A person says everything is fine, they breathe well, never complain of shortness of breath. But if you ask them to walk quickly down a corridor or take a slightly deeper breath, they immediately feel a sense of heaviness, as if there isn't enough air. Externally, they appear energetic, but internally, they are operating at reduced capacity. And the brain is the most sensitive to this. There are other scenarios. For example, a person sleeps with their mouth open, snores at night, and sometimes even experiences brief pauses in breathing that they don't notice themselves. They seem to sleep at night, but their blood oxygen levels drop. This isn't fatal, but the brain takes blow after blow, and in the morning, this person wakes up not refreshed, but tired. Even if they slept for 8 hours, their brain worked overnight with insufficient oxygen, and their memory gradually deteriorates. Not sharply, not suddenly, but little by little. I remember a 63-year-old woman who worked as a nurse. Intelligent, calm, and sensible. She came in with complaints of becoming forgetful, having trouble concentrating, and sometimes losing the thread of conversations. There were no dramatic diagnoses. But when I started asking about her sleep, it turned out that for many years she slept with a feeling of insufficient air. She would wake up several times, sometimes experiencing dry mouth. She had never thought about oxygen. After examination, it became clear that her oxygen levels dropped below normal at night, not critically, but regularly. and this was enough for her memory to begin to falter. When we corrected her nighttime breathing and added some brief daily exercises for deep inhalation, after a month she said a phrase I've heard dozens of times: "My head feels lighter, as if the light was turned on." And here's what's important to understand. Oxygen isn't an abstraction, it's the fuel for every thought. When its availability diminishes, individuals begin to notice challenges in recalling words, difficulty maintaining focus during conversations, and increased fatigue during mentally demanding tasks. Externally, this appears as aging, but fundamentally, the brain operates in a state of nutritional deficiency, functioning at minimal capacity despite its best efforts. Another often overlooked detail is that the brain requires not just oxygen, but a consistent, steady supply. Sitting for extended periods throughout the day with minimal movement, followed by a 1,000-step walk in the evening, does not constitute adequate brain nourishment. It necessitates regular blood circulation. Even a few brief strolls during the day provide the brain with more sustenance than a single prolonged effort in the evening. This is particularly crucial for those managing elevated blood pressure, excess weight, or who have experienced periods of significant stress. The brain begins to feel depleted more rapidly, which individuals perceive as mental fog, an inability to concentrate, and slower thinking. When people incorporate more fresh air, physical activity, and reduce prolonged sedentary periods, their brains seem to reawaken. Cognitive functions accelerate, clarity emerges, and mood improves. Recollection and concentration become easier. Many even report feeling younger, which is not an illusion, but a direct physiological response to the brain's renewed oxygen intake and subsequent efficient functioning. However, there's a less apparent, rarely discussed layer to this narrative. It relates less to the physical body and more to lifestyle choices, influencing the brain as profoundly as oxygen and sleep, and sometimes even more so. This factor, often dismissed by adults as an innocuous habit, actually renders the brain vulnerable, unfocused, and fatigued. It has emerged as a primary contributor to the rise in dementia cases over the past 2 decades. Adults frequently underestimate a specific element that is imperceptible, intangible, and does not directly cause pain or alarm. Yet it has become a leading reason for accelerated brain aging in the last 20 years. If individuals over the age of 50 neglect this, their memory will deteriorate irrespective of diet, exercise, blood pressure management, or even sleep quality. This element is the perpetual overload of the brain with informational noise. We tend to believe that the brain tires from work, thoughts, or daily chores, but in reality, it most often becomes exhausted from excess from the ceaseless stream of news, short videos, notifications, alarming headlines, opinions, images, and minor irritants that capture attention even when one believes they are merely glancing briefly. This brief glance involves dozens of micro switches, and each transition drains the brain's energy. It is vital to understand that after 50, the brain finds it increasingly difficult to recover from these switches. In youth, it is flexible and agile, effortlessly purging overload. After 60, each additional wave of information embeds itself more deeply. Today's living conditions are what would have been considered extreme just 30 years ago. Previously, the brain received a limited amount of information: conversations, books, work, and infrequent news. Now it's bombarded with hundreds of stimuli daily. This invisible storm leads to scattered memory, fragmented attention, and sluggish thought processes. Individuals might not notice it immediately, but they will begin to struggle with concentrating on a book, find conversations draining, experience racing thoughts, and feel a desire to be distracted rather than engage deeply. This is not laziness or a personality trait. It is a brain overwhelmed by unnecessary input. A characteristic sign observed in many patients is fatigue not from tasks but from a persistent feeling of a full head. Even on calm days with no significant events, the exhaustion is comparable to tackling complex problems. Inquiring about their evenings almost invariably reveals a similar pattern. Background television, snippets of news, short videos, messaging, browsing, opening and closing applications. Individually, these seem minor, but the brain interprets each switch as a command to pay attention. Hundreds of such instances in an evening are particularly detrimental, especially with short videos and rapid-fire content. They condition the brain to expect constant shifts in attention every few seconds. Subsequently, when attempting to read, retain information or follow a conversation, the brain struggles, having grown accustomed to a fragmented rhythm. With age, this evolves into a constant urge to be distracted, rendering memory progressively fragile, like thin glass. Consider a 68-year-old former engineer, an intelligent, thoughtful, and calm individual who complained of absent-mindedness, difficulty concentrating, and forgetfulness. Upon reviewing his daily routine, the issue became surprisingly clear. He spent 3 to 4 hours each evening watching short news segments and videos, switching between them every few seconds. He viewed this as relaxation, but his brain perceived it as continuous repetitive strain. When he replaced these evenings with calmer activities like reading, walking, and watching less visually dynamic films, he remarked after a month, "I can think in long, connected thoughts again." This precisely describes the effect. Informational noise erodes the capacity for sustained, deep, and sequential thinking. Without this ability, the brain's flexibility rapidly diminishes after 60, creating conditions for progressively poorer memory function. The insidious nature of informational noise lies in its perceived harmlessness. People think, "I'm just watching the news." However, they do not need 100 news items in an evening, nor 100 switches per hour, nor constant stimulation. An adult brain thrives in quietude. It becomes clearer with less extraneous input. It recalls better when not overloaded, and this effect is amplified with age. Sometimes, eliminating excessive informational flow for just 1 week can noticeably lighten the cognitive load. Individuals report a return of attention, as if a heavy veil has lifted. They can sustain a thought without losing track. Physiologically, this is entirely understandable. When the brain ceases continuous switching, it conserves energy, self-cleanses, repairs connections, and strengthens memory. However, informational noise is only one aspect. Another element exponentially amplifies its effects: the internal state, which makes the brain particularly susceptible, fatigued, and prone to forgetfulness. This layer has become a primary reason why many adults experience premature cognitive decline. There is a factor people discuss least, yet it impacts the brain more than poor sleep, blood pressure fluctuations, oxygen deprivation, and even informational noise. It's something carried internally for years, sometimes decades, rendering memory fragile, attention scattered, and intellect weary. This refers to chronic internal tension, not acute stress or isolated incidents, but a quiet, deep-seated anxiety that has become unnoticed due to habit. Life proceeds, tasks are managed, social interactions occur, and outwardly everything seems normal, yet internally there's a constant state of readiness, caution, and tension that the brain registers as a signal of ongoing threat. This condition, persisting for years, deprives the brain of its restorative capacity. When individuals exist in a state of chronic internal tension, their nervous system operates in a perpetual state of alertness. While they may appear calm, cheerful, and engaged outwardly, inwardly, muscles are subtly tightened and thoughts revolve around the same anxieties. Sleep becomes superficial and rest is shallow. In this mode, the body directs resources not towards restoration, but towards maintaining constant readiness. The brain ceases allocating energy to memory, attention, and learning because survival takes precedence over cognition. Even when real danger has long passed, the nervous system keeps the brain on high alert, as if imminent peril is expected. This state develops gradually, accumulating over time through multiple challenging life experiences, insufficient sleep, losses, stress, and demanding work periods. Without realizing it, internal anxiety becomes the new baseline. The distinction between tranquility and tension blurs for the individual, but the brain perceives and reacts to it. This quiet internal noise is the most insidious destroyer of maturity. I recall a 64-year-old patient, an educated, rational, and intelligent man who complained of memory gaps. "I know I knew that, but I can't retrieve it," he would say. His blood pressure, sugar levels, and sleep were all within normal ranges. When the conversation shifted to his internal state, he fell silent, admitting, "For 7 years, I've lived with the feeling that something is about to happen, for no reason." This state had become his norm. His brain remained in a constant mode of tension, never truly relaxing, day or night. When we addressed this internal dimension, his memory began to return piece by piece. It was a classic instance where, for the first time in years, he experienced the sensation of a settled mind. It's crucial to understand that the brain doesn't require absolute tranquility. It needs respite from anxiety. It needs the assurance that for at least part of the day, it can forego vigilance, control, calculation, and anticipation. When persistent internal tension grips an individual, the brain cannot enter a restorative phase. It fails to cleanse during sleep, reinforce connections, or form new memories. Its energy is expended on maintaining internal equilibrium rather than on growth. This condition is particularly deceptive because adults are adept at maintaining appearances, capable of enduring internal tension for decades without outward signs. However, the brain is always aware, reacting to the subtlest signals: heartbeat, muscle tension, breathing patterns, and thought rhythms. If internally tense, the brain prioritizes survival over memory. Consider another example. A 61-year-old woman, active and energetic, outwardly confident, but internally burdened by a chronic sense of responsibility for everyone around her. She awoke with the thought of impending tasks and went to bed with the same preoccupation, constantly prepared to resolve others' problems. She didn't perceive this as stress. It was an integral part of her character. Yet her brain operated under perpetual pressure. When she allowed herself to reduce this internal load, not drastically but even slightly, within weeks she noticed a reduction in forgetfulness, improved concentration, and faster recovery. This wasn't due to cognitive training, but because her brain could finally relax. People often underestimate the profound impact of internal tension on memory. It depletes the brain as much as sleepless night. It's a state where the body remains on alert, even during sleep. This is especially perilous in later life because the brain's capacity to compensate for such demands diminishes. Importantly, internal tension is not an irreversible sentence. It can be modified. Sometimes a few minutes of quiet time daily, a short walk, calm breathing, or reducing evening informational noise can signal to the brain that it's safe to relax. Memory then begins to return, not miraculously but predictably, as the brain redirects resources from defense to restoration. Yet there's another concluding element to this narrative, the one promised at the outset. It is the most profound, often hidden, and ultimately determinant factor. It serves as the final piece of the puzzle, essential for comprehensive brain protection against dementia. This aspect surprises many but explains almost everything. there's a reason discussed less than any other, rarely featured in research or mentioned in medical consultations. It cannot be measured by blood tests or imaging, yet it dictates brain aging more powerfully than blood pressure, sleep, oxygen, nutrition, or stress. This is the significance of meaning, the internal drive that sustains life, guides thoughts, compels the brain to function, learn, move, engage, solve problems, maintain attention, and remember. When this vital force wanes, when an individual lacks an inner pull, the brain declines much more rapidly. Remarkably, dementia often arises not from mere physiological impairments, but from a state where individuals seem to cease living their own lives, not physically dying or becoming ill, but ceasing to live on a soul level. They stop anticipating the future, lose sight of reasons to wake up, no longer feel needed, believe they can influence outcomes, care for others, or participate meaningfully. The brain abhors emptiness. It requires meaning as much as oxygen. In its absence, the brain gradually deactivates higher cognitive functions, reverting to basic existence. Outwardly, such individuals may appear normal, engaging in eating, walking, watching, and performing daily chores, but internally, the drive, the spark, and the impetus for neuronal activation are absent. Consequently, memory weakens, neural connections fray, interest in novelty wanes, and the individual progressively loses the capacity for planning, learning, and remembering because the brain perceives no purpose. Over the years, I have witnessed hundreds of cases where memory decline was not due to illness, but to the loss of meaning. This could stem from retirement, bereavement, loneliness, disillusionment, a sense of uselessness, or a lack of interests. While life continued outwardly, its internal driving force diminished. The brain, a living, sensitive, and intricate organ, responded acutely to this void. I recall a 70-year-old man whose memory had severely deteriorated, accompanied by concentration issues and conversational confusion. Extensive examinations revealed no significant underlying pathology. When we helped him find a new purpose, however small or simple, caring for a grandchild, reviving an old hobby, engaging in activities that provided a sense of significance, his memory began to improve, not dramatically or miraculously, but steadily. His brain received the signal, "I am needed." Another patient, a 68-year-old woman, did not experience such issues. She was surrounded by people, engaged in activities, and concerned with others' well-being. She had plans, interests, and students she continued to mentor even after retirement. Despite her age, blood pressure, and chronic conditions, her memory remained remarkably clear. She articulated a phrase that resonated with me for years. "As long as I am needed, I am not aging." This sounded poetic, but was pure physiology. The brain requires meaning. It is its primary energy source. When an adult loses an internal purpose, the brain conserves energy. It reduces investment in learning, connection building, and sustained attention. Memory deteriorates slowly but relentlessly. In such a state, if confronted with stress, pressure, or sleeplessness, the brain succumbs far more rapidly. The paradox lies in the fact that while genetics play a role, they are not decisive. Lifestyle is important, but not the sole determinant. The presence of meaning, however, can achieve something extraordinary. It can demonstrably slow brain aging, not metaphorically, but tangibly. An individual who rises each morning for a purpose, or for someone else, possesses stronger neural connections, more stable cognitive function, and more vibrant memory. This is observable in MRIs, cognitive tests, and clinical observations. The brain thrives on movement, not just physical, but movement driven by meaning. Here, I wish to convey a crucial, quiet yet honest observation. Memory begins to decline most rapidly, not in the presence of illness, but in solitude. This solitude is not necessarily physical. One can be alone within a family, emotionally disconnected, having long ceased sharing vital thoughts, offering input, or participating. When genuine connection is absent, the brain begins to withdraw. This withdrawal is one of the most potent catalysts for dementia development. In conclusion, I want to impart a simple yet profound message. The mature brain has the potential to remain remarkably vital. It does not have to fade. It can retain clarity into its 80s, 90s, and even hundreds, provided it receives adequate oxygen, tranquility, movement, restful sleep, and, most importantly, meaning. The latter is paramount as it compels the brain to function, repair, forge new connections, and remain alive. If you have listened this far, it signifies your genuine concern for yourself. This indicates you possess that inner dynamism which keeps the brain young. Nurture it, nourish it with quietude, fresh air, stability, engagement, warmth, and connection. Most crucially, do not permit yourself to live without meaning. It is your defense against dementia, more potent than any medication. If this discussion has proven beneficial, please share it, preserve it. Let another person understand that brain aging can be decelerated, and may you find the strength and warmth to preserve what makes you uniquely you, your memory, your clarity, your inner life. M.